Before leaping into the wake-up call of the day, I want to give you a brief glimpse at how the CIA manages narrative. This German journalist in an RT interview has already outlined how the CIA works with different kinds of people around the world to get their story out. This is about 9 minutes into the interview, so you could go back and watch it from the beginning if you want to get more of the dirt on how it all works.
Respected journalists, but if you look behind them, you'll find they are puppets on a string of the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm sorry in interrupting you. I'll give you one example. Sometimes the intelligence agencies, they come to your office and want you to write an article. I give you an example not from strange other journalists, from me myself. I've just forgotten the year. I just remember that the German Foreign Intelligence, Bundesnachrichtendienst, it is just a sister organization of the Central Intelligence Agency. It was founded by the American Intelligence Agency. So one day, the BND, this German Foreign Intelligence Agency, came to my office at the Frankfurter Allgemeine in Frankfurt. And they wanted me to write an article about Libya and about Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. I had absolutely no secret informations regarding Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and Libya. But they gave me all these secret informations, and they just wanted me to write, to sign the article with my name. I did that, but it was an article that was published in the Frankfurter Allgemeine that originally came from the Bundesnachrichtendienst, from the German Foreign Intelligence Agency. So do you really think that this is journalism, intelligence agencies writing articles?
No more than I think it's journalism when Cenk Uygur does what the Clinton machine tells him to do. The same CIA is part of the Clinton cabal, or the Clinton cabal is working for the CIA, and they're giving orders through Jeffrey Katzenberg to Cenk Uygur. It's the same thing. It's the same pay-to-play thing that's going on the world over. How much of the news that people consume worldwide has its origins in the CIA? And if the CIA doesn't actually write the articles, it influences the articles that are written and the news shows that are produced. If you feel like fighting for the heart and soul of working people the world over, the fight is against the information structure. The fight is against narrative management. The fight is against intelligence agencies. And specifically, the fight is against the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. If there is a more obvious enemy for real people to be fighting against, I don't know what it is. Before I leap into a great article by Caitlin Johnstone, I want to give you an excerpt from Robert Reich's latest article. I've pointed out in the past that Robert Reich is an unwitting derp, but he got some of the paragraphs in this story just right. Beware going back to normal thoughts. Normal gave us Trump, by Robert Reich. This was published in The Guardian. Boring, reassuring, normal. These are Biden's great strengths, but he needs to be careful. They could also be his great weaknesses. That's because any return to normal would be disastrous for America. Normal led to Trump. Normal led to the coronavirus. Normal is 4 decades of stagnant wages and widening inequality when almost all economic gains went to the top. Normal is 40 years of shredded safety nets and the most expensive but least adequate healthcare system in the modern world. Normal is also growing corruption of politics by big money, an economic system rigged by and for the wealthy. Normal is worsening police brutality. Normal is climate change now verging on catastrophe. Normal is a GOP that for years has been actively suppressing minority votes and embracing white supremacists. Normal is a Democratic Party that for years has been abandoning the working class. Given the road we were on, and are on, Trump and COVID were not aberrations. They were inevitabilities. The moment we are now in, with Trump virtually gone, Biden assembling his cabinet, and most of the nation starting to feel a bit of relief, is a temporary reprieve. If the underlying trends don't change, after Biden we could have Trumps as far as the eye can see, and health and environmental crises that make the coronavirus another step toward Armageddon. Hence the paradox. America wants to return to a reassuring normal, but Biden can't allow it. Complacency would be deadly. He has to both calm the waters and stir the pot. It's a mistake to see this challenge as placating the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. It's about dealing with problems that have worsened for decades and, if left unattended much longer, will be enormously destructive. So the question is, in an exhausted and divided America that desperately wants a return to normal, where will Biden find the energy and political will for bold changes that are imperative? So yes, Robert, you're still a derp because you think that something might happen with Biden both stirring the pot and calming the waters. Biden will be unable to do either of those things. No, we don't need any calm waters. We need massive, crippling wildcat strikes, and we need people in the streets protesting. Yes, Robert, you are a sheepdog, but you got a lot of these paragraphs right, so I wanted to share them. So if the CIA does start removing lefty pundits from the field of play, it will be because the propaganda machine has painted us as terrorists. We can see already the devastating power of that word, terrorist, in world history. As soon as they start branding us as terrorists, that gives them the green light to start removing us. This is another piece by Lauren Martinchek. So according to some Democrats, the left are terrorists? I am so tired of the gaslighting and abuse. As political discourse and demographics have shifted in recent years, the Democratic Party has undeniably been forced to grapple with intensifying and increasingly vocal opposition coming from the left. After organizations such as Justice Democrats, Our Revolution, and the Sunrise Movement have continued to grow and mount successful campaigns for candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush, it should come as no surprise that the more corporate wing of the Democratic Party has taken issue with the left using their political clout to identify their legitimate grievances with the more conservative Democrats. Recently, however, perhaps one of the most absurd and bombastic shots across the bow coming from corporate Democrats was published in Politico. Alex Thompson and Theodoric Meyer write, "Some in the Biden camp warn that the left wing of the Democratic Party is already spoiling the goodwill they built up during the presidential campaign with the flurry of attacks this week on President-elect Joe Biden's early White House appointments. I think we are at a fork in the road," said one Democratic operative in close touch with the Biden campaign. "They can either continue to just beat the drums on the streets or they can start to leverage the relationship they have. It's up to them which strategy they adopt." Well, I can tell you which strategy Sam Cedar and David Pakman would tell us to adopt. We gotta leverage our relationship, right? That was me, if you couldn't tell. The left wing's publicly aggressive tactics could lead Biden to just tune them out altogether. If all you do is escalate, then people eventually think that you're enemies and not friends, and they're like, "We don't negotiate with terrorists," said Jess Morales Roqueto, a Democratic strategist who supports many of the left wing's goals. You fucking piece of shit. You don't support left wing's goals. We gotta figure this out. And that's what all these centrist neoliberal pieces of shit want. They want us to be terrorists unless we're willing to negotiate with them. They're the terrorists. They're the tools of the oligarchs. We don't negotiate with you, motherfuckers. The chill in the relationship comes after a number of progressive groups and politicians made clear this week that there would not be any honeymoon period for the new Democratic administration. Poor babies. Firing arrows now may get headlines, but it is also the fastest way to lose influence with Biden's inner circle, which values bridge builders, some say. Some say. I know who says that. I don't want to be your friend. The best way I want to influence Biden's inner circle is with guillotines. Back to Lauren. After comparing people who are demanding basics like a right to healthcare and a habitable planet for their children to terrorists, I have to, if nothing else, give credit to Ms. Morales Roqueto for at least having the guts to put her name behind these types of comments. It's incredible how quickly the calls for unity end as soon as the election is over, isn't it? It's difficult not to take in these words and feel as though the relationship between the Democrats and the masses are nothing less than abusive. Year after year, election cycle after election cycle, we are told that they have our best interest no matter how many times their actions prove otherwise. We are browbeaten with claims that any calls for them to do better must mean we just want a Republican to win. We are chastised and called extremists for wanting nothing more than to ensure that the basic human needs of the working classes are met. The left are identified as radical for nothing more than actually fighting for policies that are overwhelmingly supported by the public overall, like a transition to a government-run healthcare plan. Day in and day out, we are told not to believe our lying eyes, and that we are now not only fringe, but terrorists for having the audacity to fight for what voters actually want. After the left objectively delivered this election for him, did Joe Biden really believe he was going to be able to get away with floating names like Rahm Emanuel for a cabinet position, or selecting someone like Cedric Richmond, who takes more money from the oil and gas industry than almost any other Democrat, to be a senior advisor and the liaison between big business and climate activists? Are we supposed to be happy with the fact that deficit hawks like Bruce Reed will be in Biden's ear? I'm not sure how much more clear the Democratic Party could make it that they will not be satisfied unless the left sits down, shuts up, and stays quiet until they need us to organize for voter turnout on their behalf. Ding, ding, ding. They have the audacity to demand that we vote for them and then liken us to terrorists for taking issue with the ugly reality that they are more interested in courting Republicans as opposed to the people who elected them into office. Meanwhile, sitting Representative Anthony Sabatini tweeted, "Kyle Rittenhouse for Congress." Is that who Joe Biden expects to unite and heal with while his party berates the left? Not even a month after he was elected, Joe Biden has already proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is no such thing as pushing someone like him to the left after he's already taken power, and the liberals who insisted it was possible have no interest in even trying. I am not at all surprised that Joe Biden's cabinet is shaping up to be even worse than I imagined it would be, but to be called terrorists for doing nothing more than using our steadily growing organizing abilities and leverage in a last-ditch effort to demand better is something that will stay with me for a long time. And now the pièce de résistance, Caitlin Johnstone. Surprise! America is getting another psycho for Secretary of State. Did you know the U.S. Department of Defense used to be called the Department of War? It would be a much more honest label today for a military which virtually never operates in any way that could be described as defensive, with its operations focusing far outside of the nation's borders against targets who pose no threat whatsoever to ordinary Americans. An even more suitable name would be the Department of Eternal War. The State Department was meant to be the counterpart to the War Department, focusing on diplomacy and peace. What ended up happening is the U.S. government morphed into a globe-spanning empire dependent on endless violence and aggression is that the State Department wound up focusing more and more on manufacturing interventionist narratives on the world stage to gin up international support for starvation sanctions, proxy wars, and war coalitions. So in practice, the U.S. ended up with two War Departments, the Department of Defense and the State Department, which is why you've seen the nation's secretaries of state becoming more and more jingoistic and psychopathic to the point where some sort of antisocial personality disorder is almost a job requirement for the position.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Yet another sadistic warmonger. The deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children are worth it. Your tax dollars at work. Bloomberg and the New York Times are reporting that the incoming presidential administration has chosen longtime Biden advisor Tony Blinken for the role of Secretary of State. Blinken is a liberal interventionist who has supported all of the most disgusting acts of U.S. mass military slaughter this millennium, including the Iraq invasion, which killed over 1 million people and ushered in an unprecedented era of military expansionism in the Middle East. So needless to say, he will fly through the confirmation process. Blinken was a key advisor to Biden when the senator voted to authorize the use of force against Iraq, Non-Zero reports. Blinken has tried to recast the vote as merely a vote for tough diplomacy, but post-invasion remarks by Biden make that claim implausible. In a recent Washington Post op-ed that Blinken co-authored with Robert Kagan, one of the chief architects of neoconservative foreign policy doctrine, he implied that the problem with the Iraq War was poor execution. bad intelligence, misguided strategy, and inadequate planning for the day after, rather than the very idea of invading a country in violation of international law even after it had admitted weapons inspectors to assess the claims motivating the invasion. How true can Biden's claim be that he regrets his pivotal role in facilitating that unforgivable act of mass military butchery if he's continued employing the man who advised him about it as an advisor ever since and is now appointing him to Secretary of State? If someone advises you to do something that you truly regret, do you continue seeking out that person's advice on the same subject and give them even more power and control over it? We can expect the next Secretary of America's Second War Department to help the U.S. death machine ramp up world-threatening Cold War escalations with China and Russia. In a July interview with Blinken, the Wall Street Journal's Walter Russell Mead was told of the Biden campaign's plan to tame China, Russia, and woke Democrats using Cold War-era democratic policy, including a liberal multilateralism supplemented when absolutely necessary by the American military and a willingness to use it. And don't forget about the journalists the world over that the CIA is helping to write articles. Here's a quotation by Mead. A Biden administration won't be looking for a reset, a grand bargain, or anything more than a business-like relationship with Vladimir Putin, Mead wrote after the interview. Democrats haven't been this hawkish on Russia since the Kennedy administration. Here's a chilling tweet by Dan Cohen. Nominee to lead State Department Tony Blinken recently explained that Biden's pledge to end the forever wars means the U.S. will reduce large-scale deployments while expanding secret wars waged by special forces and proxies.
As for ending the forever wars, Tony Blinken says not so fast.
Large-scale, open-ended deployment of large standing U.S. forces in conflict zones with no clear strategy should end and will end under his watch. But we also need to distinguish between, for example, these endless wars with the large-scale open-ended deployment of U.S. forces with, for example, discrete, small-scale, sustainable operations, maybe led by special forces, to support local actors. In ending the endless wars, we also have to be careful not to paint with too broad a brushstroke.
So Biden will end the forever wars, but not really end them. Secret wars that the public doesn't know the U.S. is involved in, those are here to stay.
Those are here to stay unless the public rises up in opposition. The public won't rise up in opposition until they know what's going on. They won't know what's going on if independent voices are not allowed to be heard. So if you go back and watch the show from a couple of days ago, you'll realize that our days may be numbered. The people who want to tell you what's actually going on may be silenced eventually. So listen while you can. All you really need to know about Tony Blinken has been summed up nicely in a must-see new Behind the Headlines report by Dan Cohen. Blinken's career has been a pendulum between expanding the U.S. empire and helping corporate power knit itself more deeply into that empire. Within the Obama administration, he backed the unforgivably devastating interventions in Libya and Syria, as well as the 2014 Ukraine coup. He was a major proponent of backing the Saudi-led mass atrocities in Yemen, and he says such proxy conflicts will be the new model for U.S. interventionism going forward. Cohen quotes Blinken arguing in favor of replacing old-school Bush-era conventional ground invasions with discrete, small-scale, sustainable operations, maybe led by special forces to support local actors. In ending the endless wars, I think we have to be careful to not paint with too broad a brushstroke. In other words, the continuation and expansion of all of the Obama administration's most depraved policies. So we can expect a strengthening of the Python-like strangulation strategies the U.S. empire now favors, with the same number of dead children, the same amount of destabilization and suffering, and the same amount of resource consumption, just without all those pesky news headlines and footage of flag-draped coffins coming home on jet planes. A photogenic mask on the blood-spattered face of the U.S. empire, which has been so troublingly exposed in the age of Trump. Are you excited about that return to decency yet?